She walked into the mansion with hope in her heart, believing love would conquer everything. But the moment her skin color met their eyes, the room filled with laughter, the kind that cuts deeper than words. They mocked her, whispered behind her back, and called her nothing more than a mistake. What they didn't know was that the same woman they belittled would soon decide their fate. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't come with anger. It comes with power. And she had more of it than they could ever imagine. Amara grew up believing in grace, kindness, and hard work. She had built her career from the ground up, a brilliant investment analyst who turned struggling companies into global giants. Yet beneath her confidence, she still carried the quiet hope of being accepted for who she was, not judged by the color of her skin. When she met Daniel, it felt like destiny. He was kind, respectful, and saw her brilliance long before anyone else did. Their love blossomed quickly, and within months, he introduced her to his wealthy family, owners of a century-old business empire. That's when everything changed. NNTHE family's mansion stood like a symbol of old money and old beliefs. The moment Amara stepped through its marble doorway, she could feel the chill, polite smiles masking quiet judgment. Their eyes scanned her like a flaw they couldn't hide, their laughter too sharp, their words too sweet. Daniel tried to ease the tension, but the silence between glances said it all. She didn't belong there. And still, Amara smiled through it. She believed she could win them over with warmth and humility. What she didn't know was that behind closed doors, they mocked her, her accent, her background, her very existence in their perfect world. NBUT fate has a way of turning cruelty into consequence. And soon, the same family that looked down on her would come begging, unaware that the woman they ridiculed held the key to their future and their downfall. The weekend after their wedding, Amara tried again to fit in. She brought gifts for Daniel's parents, handcrafted pieces from African artists she admired, but they smiled politely and placed them aside, like trinkets unworthy of their shelves. At dinner, she spoke about her latest investment project, how she had turned a failing logistics company into a billion-dollar enterprise. Daniel's father interrupted, chuckling, "Oh, that must have been beginner's luck." The laughter that followed wasn't playful. It was cruel, deliberate, and days turned into weeks. Amara began noticing the whispers, the quiet glances when she entered a room. The staff, trained to obey the family's tone, avoided eye contact with her. Every word she spoke was met with polite disbelief, every achievement questioned. One evening, she overheard Daniel's mother on the phone saying, "He could have married anyone, but he chose her." NNTHAT night, Amara sat alone in the vast guest room, staring out the window at the manicured gardens below. The lights of the estate shimmered like diamonds, cold, unreachable. She thought about leaving, but a deeper voice inside whispered, "Not yet." She remembered the way they had laughed and how they needed constant outside investors to keep their empire alive. Weeks later, at a charity gala hosted by Daniel's family, fate began to turn. A powerful global investor group arrived, one Amara knew all too well. She had once saved their company from collapse. When they spotted her, they rushed over with admiration, thanking her publicly for the billion-dollar turnaround she had orchestrated. The room went silent. Daniel's family watched in shock as people they had spent years trying to impress praised the woman they had mocked. Still, the family didn't change. Pride ran deeper than reason. They belittled her achievements, insisting she was lucky. A diversity success story, nothing more. NNBUT Amara had already made her decision. Quietly, strategically, she began to pull strings. The investors were planning a new global expansion, a project that Daniel's family desperately wanted in on. What they didn't know was that Amara was now on the board of that same investment group. In meetings, she sat silently while her in-laws pitched proposals, unaware that every word, every number, passed through her approval. When they presented their final offer, the board rejected it unanimously, citing ethical concerns. Behind the scenes, Amara had exposed their history of discriminatory hiring and racist workplace culture. NNTHE fallout was immediate. Stocks began to tumble. Their biggest clients pulled out. Reporters started digging. The empire that had stood for a century began to crack. And through it all, Amara said nothing. She just watched, the same calm smile she once wore now concealing a storm of justice long overdue. And NBY, the time they realized who had orchestrated their downfall, it was too late. The woman they laughed at was the same woman who had quietly taken everything they built and turned it to dust. And NBUT, this was only the beginning. The world was about to know who Amara really was, and what she stood for. The truth broke like a storm. Overnight, news outlets began running headlines. Racism allegations rock prestigious business family. Anonymous sources leaked internal emails, mocking jokes, discriminatory comments, and hiring records that painted a damning picture. Within hours, the empire that once looked untouchable was burning from the inside out. Daniel's father stormed into their home, his voice trembling with fury. "You did this! You ruined us!" he shouted. Amara didn't flinch. For the first time, she looked him straight in the eyes, not with anger, but with the calm of someone who had carried a lifetime of silent pain. "You ruined yourselves," she said quietly, and NHE froze. Those words carried more weight than any accusation ever could. They weren't spoken in vengeance. They were spoken in truth. NNTHE investors withdrew their support, citing ethical violations. The board dissolved. Lawsuits followed. Years of arrogance and entitlement were crumbling before their eyes. Daniel stood helplessly between two worlds, the family he came from and the woman he claimed to love. But silence had its price, and he had chosen it for too long. When the last investor pulled out, a deal worth over $1 billion, Amara's name appeared in the headlines once more. The woman who brought justice through business. In that moment, she wasn't just a wife or a victim of prejudice. She was a symbol of power reclaimed, of dignity restored. The same family that had laughed at her complexion now begged her to save them. But she didn't. Some lessons, she knew, were meant to be learned the hard way. And as she walked away from the marble estate for the last time, flashbulbs lit up the night sky. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked, chaos surrounded her. Yet she moved through it all like a queen returning to her throne, unbothered, untouchable, unforgettable. Because this wasn't just revenge, it was redemption. Months passed. The once powerful family faded from the business world, their empire reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and business schools. The marble estate that once gleamed with pride now stood silent, a reminder that arrogance built on prejudice always collapses under its own weight. Amara didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the respect they had tried to strip away. She continued her work, quietly funding scholarships for underrepresented students, mentoring young Black entrepreneurs, and helping build companies that believed in fairness over legacy. One morning, during a televised interview, a journalist asked her, "Do you think racism will ever end?" NSHE paused, looked into the camera, and said softly, "Not until people stop confusing skin color with worth. Not until they see that power isn't inherited, it's earned." NNT Ho's words echoed far beyond the studio. Social media flooded with her quote. Schools, activists, and everyday people began sharing her story, not as a scandal, but as proof that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply endures. NNFOR Daniel's family, the loss was irreversible. But for millions watching, Amara's rise became a symbol of justice. Not the kind written in courtrooms, but the kind that lives in quiet resilience and the refusal to break. Because racism isn't just about cruelty, it's about the blindness of those who think they'll never be held accountable. And stories like Amara's remind us that change doesn't always march in protests. Sometimes, it walks silently through doors no one thought it could enter and changes everything. NNSO, the question remains, NHOW many more Amaras. Will the world ignore before it learns to see beyond color and start valuing humanity?